You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
Welcome to 2024, folks. Happy New Year. 2024 is going to be a great year for managed services. Demand is off the charts. The threats are real. The value and the ability for MSPs all over the world to play a vital role like they have been for 20, 30 years now in defending critical infrastructure, private enterprise, public sector organizations, doesn't matter. MSPs are even more valuable than they ever have been. And yet we've got a lot of stuff happening. A lot of change is taking place, as it always has. And it is incredibly important for you as an MSP to be aware of that change and to be ahead of it. Because when you stay ahead of the change, which is always going to happen, you will then be more valuable to your customer than if you're playing catch up, in which case you're kind of like a break fix company at that point. But more on that later. We're going to be talking about our 2024 managed services outlook. We're going to be talking not so much about the economy, although that's really good, and I'll make some side comments about it throughout the episode. I really want to touch on a handful of hot button issues that I believe are really critical for all MSPs to be aware of. This is MSPs of all sizes, big, small, medium. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you are a practicing proactive managed IT service provider, or you want to be one, listen to this. This is in no particular order of importance, but these are all, kind of unique issues that all need to be recognized and addressed within your managed services practice. Number one, ransomware, particularly ransomware response. You as the MSP have an incredible duty, obligation, opportunity to lead your customers through their daily operations, their annual operations, and to guide them on a number of issues, including how to prevent or protect against a ransomware attack. And then if they were to unfortunately successfully be attacked and be hit with ransomware, what to do afterwards. And it's what to do afterwards that is almost always as or more important than defending against it. Because let's face it, if they want to get in, the bad guys, they're going to probably get in, or they're going to have a lot more success and probability of getting in than not. And so it becomes, how well prepared are you? And ransomware payments are kind of a touchy issue because for many, many years, it has been, if not an explicitly stated policy, then an implicit policy of ransomware payments are an option to get valuable data back fast and to move on with your daily operations as an organization. It is very clear to me and to many others who monitor this that the world, when I say the world, leading governments and countries around the world are moving fairly steadily towards a policy of, if not prohibiting ransomware payments, then discouraging ransomware payments. And if you are aware of this trend, then it can be incredibly important and valuable to you as an MSP to take this information and talk about it with your customers. What would you say? Well, if I was an MSP, I would say to a customer, you may be looking at me, your MSP, you may be looking at your insurance company, you may be looking at a worst case scenario, just paying money to get this stuff back, as all options to do before you do things that you should be doing now, which is just being better, more cyber hygienic, doing more on the preventative side to prevent yourself from getting attacked successfully, or preventing a really negative outcome if you were successfully attacked, different than paying for the ransomware in the first place, like backing up data and so forth. And so I would be talking to my customers and explaining to them how the policy shift is happening. And again, I'm not saying that ransomware payments are going away, but I am saying that they are certainly being more actively discouraged. And I think that you're going to see financial penalties, sanctions, and other types of things start to apply and associate themselves with ransomware payments and organizations that make them. And you should be aware of it. And you should be telling your customers that this is happening. And you should be preparing them for what happens if that as an option goes away. Well, thankfully, there's a ton they can do to prevent and survive a cyber attack. And that's where you come in, you, the MSP. But you got to be aware of this. And so the ransomware thing is real. We're monitoring it. We'll continue to put out information about that. But the policy that I would take into 2024 as an MSP would be, don't rely even like first, second, or even third option for cyber reaction as paying the ransomware. I would be assuming that that's going to be even more discouraged or difficult to go after, and stick with common available cyber defenses, managed services practices that could do an equally or even better job. Next is more of a it's not an outlook. It's more of a reaffirmation that break fix is still dead. And it's never coming back, folks. It's never going to come back. And I'm reminded of this, and I'm bringing this to your attention because I still talk to a lot of new members who are kind of young. They're startup companies. They're very eager. They're enthusiastic, and I talk to a lot of very old companies who are still got one foot firmly in that break fix or reactive side of their business. And I would say that if you're still, let me step back for a moment. I use the term break fix and reactive in a negative sense. In that it is not what professional managed services is all about. I use break fix and reactive as terms to categorize things that IT providers ought not to do. What they ought to do is proactive IT management, or what we call managed services. And I am firmly aware, I am very aware that if you, as an MSP, and you may consider yourself tried and true through and through an MSP organization, but you may still have one, two handful of customers who aren't MSP customers. They're break fix customers. And you've tried to get them to convert. You've tried to get them to switch over to managed services. You've done everything. You've tried increasing prices. You've tried doing so much. I get it. And they still won't budge. That's not your fault. But I think 2024 brings a whole new perspective. And I've it's not new. I believed this in 2023. I believed it probably for many, many years now, that there is no way for a modern day MSP to adequately take care of a break fix reactive customer. There's no way. You're not delivering any value of meaning that they couldn't get anywhere else on the break. I'm talking of the break fix side. So have a strategy. This is the outlook planning that I would recommend. If you are one of these companies, and there's probably a lot of you out there that still have reactive companies in your portfolio, talk to them, devise a strategy, but make 2024 the year that you say, enough is enough. You either come on board our managed services model, or we're going to have to part ways. Because at this stage, folks, I just don't see a reactive break fix customer as anything other than huge risk with no upside. Whatever revenue they're bringing you, it's outweighed by the risk that they bring. Whether you see it yet or not, it's there. Okay, moving on. Artificial intelligence, really hotly debated topic. Everyone's discussing it. All the massive layoffs in the big public tech sector community that are happening appear to be related to AI. Like all the big companies are saying, we're letting headcount go so that we can focus on AI and optimization and automation. So there's a lot of that going on, and there's a lot of opinions in economic circles and in tech circles about, is AI good or bad? All right, I'm not going to get into that. You have to have, as an MSP, a position on AI. And I'll tell you what the position of the quite a few MSPs that I've talked to is, that AI is probably unavoidable at this point. It's everywhere. It's going to be something that MSPs are going to have to take into consideration. Number two, um, MSPs do not trust AI yet, and may not for a very, very long time. MSPs don't trust AI enough to put AI technology directly up against their customer, which is to say that the MSPs want to keep AI tech back under the control of the MSP organization so that the customer isn't exposed potentially to a negative experience, whether that's a negative technical experience, a negative customer service experience. I think both are legitimate issues, but that's what the MSPs are telling us that they're very cautious about. They are using AI. They're really relying after and going after relationships with their vendors who have developed AI as back office automation and expansions of their team. Very common theme that we're hearing. But the MSPs are very cautious and saying, look, we're just not going to expose our customers directly to AI technology yet. And I think that that's a very prudent approach. Whatever your approach is going to be, you got to have one, and you probably should have it articulated so that anyone in the company can really talk intelligently about it to your customers. I want to shift topic a little bit to this concept of more progressive or more mature minded MSPs, and that's not to say that there aren't some really small MSP shops that are thinking along these lines already. But when it comes to either compliance, when it comes to vCIO, vCISO types of services, maybe you've had legacy vCISO, CIO services, and you now want to infuse it with more compliance and cybersecurity. That's a very common theme we're hearing from MSPs. You ought to have an MSP baseline. What do I mean by an MSP baseline? I mean that you need in 2024 to have not just a random sampling of, hey, I'm going to pick CMMC, or I'm going to pick ISO, or I'm going to pick SOC 2, or I'm going to pick HIPAA or High Trust, or I'm going to pick CSF or NIST, or I'm going to pick PAPIA down in South Africa, for those South African members listening, or maybe you're thinking about UK Cyber Essentials for you folks in the United Kingdom, whatever. Globally speaking, every country now is probably either has or is in the process of identifying their own kind of country's cybersecurity approach or policy. The problem with all of those countries in this regard is that none of them are thinking about you, the MSP. And none of those frameworks that they're contemplating are MSP frameworks. You need, as in the MSP, your own baseline. Your controls for your company need to be commensurate with MSP best practices, our industry's best practices. It needs to be well documented. It needs to be preferably tested. The policies, procedures, your documentation needs to be there. All these things need to be there. As an MSP just told me the other day, we do the right things. We do things the right way. We don't have it written down. And that's a really common thing. But that's what's required to have an MSP baseline. And so when you have, and why I'm saying you need an MSP baseline is this: when you have a developed, documented, tested MSP baseline of controls, it will make your VCIO, VCISO, compliance as a service, cybersecurity as a service, whatever you call that thing, it will make that so much easier. Because when you have that baseline, if you pick any given framework out there, if you're in the UK and you pick UK Cyber Essentials, or if you're in South Africa and you pick ISO 27001, or in the United States and you have either CMMC or SOC 2 or ISO or HITRUST or HIPAA or any of the other frameworks that might apply to your given vertical markets, your baseline MSP controls will then be very valuable in helping those managed services customers in those disparate markets. But absent to your own MSP controls, you're going to be starting from scratch every single time. You're going to be recreating, whether you call it crosswalk or you're calling it control mapping, it doesn't matter. If you don't have your own control baseline set, you have no true north. It's like a compass that has no concept of where north is. And if you don't have that, the compass is completely useless as a tool, as a directional tool. Create your MSP baseline in 2024. It will make a tremendous difference, guaranteed. Pricing. I'd like to talk a little bit about managed services pricing. I don't really care if you are a advocate and you use per user pricing, per device pricing, if you are a la carte, if you are all you can eat. There's a variety of different methods. You could have all of those or any one of those pricing frameworks in use right now, but you ought to have some element of risk-based pricing infused in 2024. What does that mean? Okay. I've used this example many times, but I think it's still very helpful analogy. You take two identical customer environments, same size, headcount, same number of devices, same software, hardware setup, identical. Even identical industries, right? Identical down to the core. One customer is below your MSP baseline of controls and cybersecurity, whatever. The other customer is at or above your baseline. You see where I'm going here, right? It doesn't matter what your pricing model is. A less mature MSP would take identical companies and come out with identical pricing for each one of them if they just stuck with a kind of a dull, no analytics whatsoever, straightforward approach of how many people, how many devices, and then come out with the same pricing. An MSP that uses risk-based pricing and has a baseline of their controls, meaning of what they're going to allow before they can actually take on a managed services customer, would have two very different pricing models for these two companies that I've proposed. Really different. The company below the baseline would have a larger price, a higher price attached to it for its managed services, whereas the company that's at or above would have less of a price. Why? Because the company that has below the baseline starting point, they're more risky. They're going to be more of a risk to you. It's going to manifest itself in maybe more time, more manual time, more resources, human resources. It could be more resources in the form of more technological licenses being required to meet that customer's needs and to raise them up, or to offset that risk if they say that they're not going to do certain things to bring their minimum baseline up to your level. There's a lot of ways, and we haven't even talked about the legal risk, the financial risk, the insurance risk, right? All very critical things. But a lot of MSPs don't factor those in, and that's what risk-based pricing really does. And that's why I think that any MSP, regardless of whether you use another pricing model as your foundation, you have to infuse your pricing with risk-based pricing at some level to offset and to take advantage of customers that do value good cyber hygiene, and to protect yourself, protect you, the MSP, against those customers that don't. Very critical. Back to the topic of compliance, really briefly. It's undeniable to me that there are MSPs, even a ton of MSPs who have never been certified themselves, who are jumping headfirst into compliance. And I don't want people to get hurt, but I do applaud the vigor and the enthusiasm of these companies, even small companies, to do this, to get involved in compliance level discussions with their customers. I would just simply remind you and encourage you, similar to how I said previously about creating your own MSP baseline. Whether you are or are not getting involved in compliance in 2024, you should think about getting cyber verified. It's our industry standard. It was created in 2004. It'll give you your baseline with you don't have to think about it. You have to do any, you don't have to dig around and search for it. It's there. It's presented to you. It tried and true, been out there for 20 years and maps to all the other frameworks. It goes beyond all the other frameworks, but it does map a crosswalk control, map control, whatever you want to call it. It adequately translates to all the other frameworks, major control frameworks that are out there. But it will really help you understand your position and your strength in the compliance supply chain. And that's really what I'm talking about, is if you're not certified and if you don't have that control baseline, that MSP control baseline, you're really swimming out in the ocean and you're not really having a clear direction of where you're going. And that's not a good position to be in, especially in 2024, when so many organizations need desperately help from MSPs to kind of give them that structure, that guidance, that foundation upon which to build a good IT management program. XDR. And I shouldn't single out XDR, but I kind of am, because it's probably the most pressing issue that I see in terms of a big gap of a technology gap in terms of companies, organizations who are still relying on what I would consider legacy firewall, legacy security technologies, both hardware and software. And the push from vendors to MSPs to get involved in XDR is tremendous. I understand that, but it's not for a lack of a good reason. And it's really important that MSPs, start to not only internally utilize XDR, EDR, MDR, I mean, all of that in the same bucket. It's important for you to start acting on this internally and also pushing it downstream to your customers. It's part of that level set, that control baseline of, if you still have customers who are using kind of outdated, technology like firewalls that haven't been upgraded in many years, it's really time to yank that stuff out and say, look, we're not going to manage it anymore. We're not going to sell it to you anymore. This is now new technology that takes the place of this old stuff, and this is really what's needed. And those are tough conversations, I admit, but you need to have them, and you need to have that ability and comfort to know what technologies you're bringing to market this year. And that's really going to come with first having your own baseline, having it tested, having it certified, and all that, and then being able to converse with other frameworks. That's kind of the logical sequence that we see. The major shift in summarizing all of this is the MSPs have the same role that they've always had for 30 years, right? You are the trusted advisor. You're guiding your customers. You're managing IT. You're advising them on strategy. You may or may not be selling them software or hardware. That's kind of a separate issue, but you're managing your customer's environment to a large extent. And compliance is here to stay. Laws, policies, regulations are becoming more and more common. And if you, as the MSP, are not familiar with this and not prepared to deal with it, 2024 is going to be like any other year. It might be a struggle, but it doesn't have to be. 2024 is going to be a banner year. It's going to be an amazing blowout year for a lot of MSPs because they've already figured out what their control baseline is. They've already been certified. They've already been tested. They already understand what their company controls are, and they understand how those controls impact their downstream managed services customers. That's where you as an MSP need to get to this year. That's my challenge to you. Because once you get to that point, again, I've said this a few times, but I think it bears repeating again. When you get to that point that I just articulated, you stop just pouring expense into the compliance bucket, and you really flip it around and you turn all the investment that you've made, all the hard work you've put into your internal security compliance, for your MSP practice. It starts then to become a monetization powerhouse engine. But you have to do the groundwork first. You have to do the preliminary steps first to get to that point where you can actually unlock that revenue monetization potential. That's what 2024 is going to be largely about, folks. It's going to be those MSPs that have done what I just said, and those that only think about it or try to take shortcuts. There are no shortcuts here. You got to do the work, but it's achievable for even the smallest of MSPs. You can achieve it. But if you do it, it's going to be an amazing transformation, and it's going to unlock so many opportunities. I just ask you to trust me. I see what's happening. The MSPs I'm talking to, they're saying the same thing. So I'm just relaying what MSPs are saying to me. It's going to be a great year. Take advantage of it. Be prepared to have ongoing change. That's never going to stop. And be safe. And we'll see what the new year brings us. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.